Harry and his wife, Part 7, Netflix analysis. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Well, on we go. Harry now tells us that he and Harry's wife apparently met through Instagram, that he was scrolling through his feed and someone who was a friend had this video of the two of them. It was like a Snapchat. And then Harry's wife interjects with, oh gosh, that whole thing, there's like dog ears. And we then have a picture of Harry's wife using a filter, not for the first time I'm sure, showing her with a dog ears and a dog nose. Absolutely fascinating. This is the type of material that the world really needs to know about, doesn't it? And this, let me put it, this friend who remains nameless, which to my mind smacks of an invention and a revision of history, suggests that the two meet up. And apparently the friend says to Harry's wife, it's Prince Has. Yeah, like you would write that. And then Harry's wife responds with, who's that? Oh, do excuse me. My absolute bollocks detector has just gone off. I'll just have to switch that off before it starts making too much noise. Okay. This is a revision of history to suggest that the friend who remains nameless, why is the friend nameless? We got to hear earlier on from, let me see, Lindsay Jill Roth, Lucy Fraser. We hear from somebody called Silver Tree later on. All of these people go on camera. Why the sudden camera shyness of this particular individual that purportedly led to the introduction, to my mind, is because they don't actually exist. And to suggest also that this person said, it's Prince Has, as if they'd write about him in that way, and then for Harry's wife to respond with the who's that, just stretches credibility completely. We all know that she was well aware of the royal family. There's plenty of evidence to support that. Yet she insists with this narrative of telling porky pies and continues with this through the Netflix docuseries. Harry's wife goes on to say, well, people say, did you Google him? And I said, no, but I asked to see his feed. That is your homework. So, of course, in effect, it's splitting hairs to say that she didn't Google him. She, of course, had a good look around at him. Of course she did. She knew who he was. She will have Googled him, and she will have had a good scroll through the Instagram feed. That's what we do. She explained that she went through his feed, and it was full of beautiful photographs and environmental shots. Now, this, of course, her narcissism will have pricked its ears up. First of all, demonstrative of aesthetically pleasing environments, which would appeal to the somatic side of her narcissism. The fact that he travels, which appeals to her somatic side of her narcissism. This also, of course, supports the fact that there is something that her narcissism can mirror by explaining, oh yes, I love to travel too. I love to go to places, or at least go to some of them, and in other instances I lift the material from other people's recollections and pass it off as my own by view of character trait acquisition. The environmental shots of him caring for animals, etc., is demonstrative of emotional empathy. Some of you watching this video will be familiar with my publication, Sitting Target, where I explain how and why the narcissist targets you, going through the various things that the narcissist either consciously or subconsciously looks for in our victims, where we find that information from, what it is that we see that we do that gives us those tells, those indicators to determine that you have the empathic traits, the class traits, the special traits, which mean that you are a prime target. Harry's wife's narcissism has done the same here. It has led her to look through the Instagram feed of Harry to learn more about him, so that her narcissism wants to see, is he ticking those boxes in terms of doing the things that are necessary that support that he would make a good victim? Does he demonstrate those empathic traits, which mean that he's easier to ensnare and keep ensnared? Is he showing the class traits, basically the flavours, the preferences that Harry's wife would like? Is he exhibiting particular special traits? For instance, has he been ensnared by a narcissist before? Does he have some kind of childhood vulnerability, as we all know that he has? And so the narcissism instinctively leads her to look for these things, and one way of doing so is looking through the social media feed of the victim for these clues and indicators. Where, of course, she talks about doing homework, that isn't her saying, oh, I'm specifically looking for these things in order to ensnare him. What she's referring to there is it's homework in terms of understanding more about who this person is, getting to understand more about what they are, how they behave, what it is that they do. But what's really going on subconsciously is this is an excellent example of her narcissism in action, being described in this docuseries, where she's essentially vetting him to establish, is he an excellent victim? And I'd encourage you, if you'd like to learn more about all of this, to read my excellent publication, Sitting Target. Harry then goes on to explain that they somehow got one another's numbers and that we were constantly, I think he means repeatedly, in touch. This is demonstrative of the monopolization of time of the narcissist, poor boundary recognition, the sense of entitlement to keep in touch, the hoovering of Harry's wife, and of course the emotional thinking of the victim, whereby he's brought into her world and thinks, gosh, this is interesting and exciting and fun. I really like this woman. We then cut to Harry's wife's friend, talking about that she was at Wimbledon with Harry's wife and they were discussing different dates and different possibilities, which is somewhat at odds with somebody who was intent on being single. So all of a sudden we see the contradictory nature of Harry's wife being exposed in a matter of minutes in her own programme, where she talks about, I was intent on being single. Actually, I was discussing lots of different opportunities and angles and dates, possibilities with my friend. We all know that she was on the hunt, and for her to now to suggest that she was intent on being single is just a revision of history. We then meet somebody called Silver Tree, who's big on the old vocal fry, and is a non-intimate secondary source as a friend in the fuel matrix of Harry's wife and is undoubtedly a Coterie member. She recalls Harry's wife explaining that she was going out on a date and tells us about that. And of course, this is demonstrative of the way that Harry's wife asserts control over her friend by saying, I'm going out on a date. And then Harry's wife explains that they met at 76 Dean Street and immediately chastises Harry by explaining that he was late. She then states, I couldn't work out why he would be late. Well, of course not. Why would anybody be late for a meeting with the Empress of Woke? Why would anybody be tardy and drag their heels when they have the opportunity to spend the evening with the most beautiful, most intelligent, most interesting, most empathic, most wonderful human being that has been placed upon this earth? This is demonstrative of her grandiosity, that she can't understand how he would be late. She then goes on to say, oh, is he one of these guys who have so much of an ego that you're not gonna, and then that any girl would sit around wait for an hour. I was just not interested in that. Well, of course, this again is part of the soundtrack of I'm a strong, independent woman who only gets through life by marrying men and leeching off them. But also to say, oh, I'm not going to put up with that, which is demonstrative of her narcissism. Remember, there'd be plenty of people who would say, well, I wouldn't tolerate somebody being late, and I'm not a narcissist. Indeed, but remember, we know that she is, and therefore, when we look at her behaviours and actions and what she says, we interpret it through that lens. So when you as a non-narcissist say, I wouldn't tolerate somebody being late, that is you expressing a lack of patience for such behaviour, which is understandable, and is a form of assertion of a boundary. But when a narcissist does it, it is a response to a threat to control. The other person turning up late threatens the narcissist's sense of control by suggesting that that individual is not important. It suggests that that individual is not meaningful, and therefore the narcissist can't have that. And therefore it prompts her, in order to chastise Harry, by in effect revisiting what went on in the past and saying, oh, I'm not interested in somebody like that. That's her narcissism speaking. Harry's wife continues by telling us he was just so, meaningful little pause, fun. One thing that is quite clear in all of the things that she's saying through this boring series is that she often engages in the over-exaggerated response, that we have these pregnant pauses which are done for effect. They're so transparent and so tedious to observe. And she explained that he was just so refreshingly fun. And that was the thing. We were childlike together. In effect, what's happened there is that Harry, as we all know, being a bit of the party prince, being a bit of a cheeky chappy, her narcissism has caused her to mirror him for the purposes of asserting that control over him. It's then explained that they had a great chat for about an hour. And Harry's wife states, "I left after an hour," assertion of control by withdrawal. "I told him I had other plans," and she grins. Essentially, what she's doing there is revelling in the recollection of the assertion of control, although she doesn't realise that's what it is. However, she then hoovers him and saying, "I then called him that evening and suggested dinner the following evening because I was flying back, and I'm sure he thought it was so very forward and American." So, of course, she has already got him in her sights, and they've met up, and she started to ensnare him. The narcissism is checking that he fits the boxes in terms of the right type of victim, and therefore, as the narcissism dictates that he does, it compels her to then state, "I want to see you again," and thus she hoovers him further. But what happened next on their follow-up date? Well, I'm going to analyse that for you in the next part. Join me there.